My neighbour, a man who wears tinfoil hats unironically, knocked on my door one afternoon looking furious. He was holding a binder he called his case file. He opened it to show me photos of his poodle, Sparky, wearing a tiny feather boa. He then accused my new 5G Wi-Fi router of emitting homosexual frequencies that were influencing his dog. He threatened to sue me for veterinary emotional distress if I didn't switch back to my old router. I got a call from a local police officer who sounded like he was trying very hard not to laugh. He said a neighbour had reported a hostile entity watching her from my apartment and that he was obligated to perform a wellness check. I opened the door to find two cops on my porch. I led them inside, and the reporting officer pointed to my window where my fluffy 15-pound ginger cat, Cheeto, was sleeping in the sun. The neighbour had called 911 because my cat was staring at her menacingly. The guy across the street decided the public parking spot directly in front of his house was his own. He put out 2 large traffic cones every time he left. One day I came home and it was the only spot available, so I got out, moved the cones to the sidewalk and parked. He stormed out of his house yelling, "That's a private driveway extension. It's on my property line's aura." I just pointed at the city curb and said, "Buddy, auras don't count as real estate." My downstairs neighbour complained that my walking was too loud. I work a desk job from home and wear slippers, so I'm not sure what she was hearing. The next week, she slipped a note under my door with a detailed stomping schedule she had created, claiming I had a peak stomping hour at 2:15 p.m. The note ended with, "Whatever ritual you are performing, please be more considerate of those below you." We have a shared fence with our neighbour. He decided to paint his side a hideous neon green. Instead of using a roller or tarp, he used a high-powered sprayer on a windy day. Not only did he get green overspray on our patio furniture and the side of our house, but he also managed to paint his own cat, which then ran into our yard, leaving little green paw prints all over our deck. My neighbour is an aspiring DJ who works the night shift, so he practices at 3 a.m. It's not even music, just the same bass drop sound effect over and over. I finally went over to complain. He opened the door wearing giant headphones and yelled over the silence, "I know, right? This beat is fire!" He couldn't hear his own music and had no idea the entire building was vibrating. A lady next door was convinced our 100-year-old oak tree was stealing her sunlight and stunting her prize-winning petunias. She demanded we cut it down. We refused. A week later, I caught her on my security camera in the middle of the night, standing over the roots on our property, pouring 2 giant containers of salt into the soil. I was having a small BBQ in my own backyard with a few friends. My neighbour, who we never invited because he's a jerk, leaned over the fence holding a garden hose. He sprayed down my entire grill, extinguishing the flames and soaking all the food. He calmly said, "The smell of delicious food I'm not invited to eat is emotionally distressing to me," and went back inside. My neighbour's kids constantly kicked their soccer ball against our shared wall. We asked the dad politely if he could have them play in the yard instead. The next day, he came over and proudly announced, "Problem solved! I've instructed them to only use the other side of your house now, so it evens out the noise and potential for dents." The guy who lived below me would bang on his ceiling with a broom handle every single time I flushed my toilet after 10 p.m. I finally confronted him about it. He looked at me with dead serious eyes and said, "The sudden rush of water awakens the pipe spirits, and their screaming keeps me from my slumber. You must appease them by flushing before nightfall." My neighbour borrowed my brand new top-of-the-line lawnmower. He returned it a week later with the gas tank empty, the blade completely chipped and covered in what looked like mud and tar. He left a note on the handle that said, "Thanks, she's a bit dull now. You should really get that sharpened. Also, she doesn't cut through asphalt very well." The woman across the street is obsessed with lawn regulations. I once saw her in her front yard with a ruler measuring my blades of grass. She then called the city and filed a formal complaint because my lawn was, according to her, a quarter of an inch in violation of Municipal Code 4B. The city official who came out just sighed and left. My neighbour bought a 100-foot green garden hose for the sole purpose of stealing my water. I caught him red-handed one morning with the hose snaking across my entire front lawn, connected to my spigot, filling up his massive inflatable pool. When I confronted him, he had the audacity to say, "Well, your spigot is closer to the pool than mine is. I'm just being efficient. It's better for the environment to use a shorter water travel distance." The woman who lives in the apartment next to mine is a freegan who gets most of her belongings from dumpsters. That's fine, but she started creating art installations in the shared hallway. One week, it was a pyramid of expired yogurt cups. The next, it was a mobile made of old shoes. When the landlord told her to stop, she accused him of stifling her post-consumerist artistic expression. My neighbour is obsessed with holiday decorations. He put up his Christmas display, complete with 20,000 flashing lights, a rooftop sleigh, and speakers blasting Jingle Bell Rock on a loop, on October 15th. When I asked if he could at least turn the music off at night, he looked at me like I was crazy and said, "The spirit of Christmas doesn't sleep, and neither does my sound system. I have a beautiful rose garden that I'm very proud of." My elderly neighbour decided he was going to help me prune them one afternoon while I was at work. I came home to find he had chopped every single one of my prize-winning bushes down to bald 6-inch stumps. He was beaming with pride and told me, "Had to perform a hard reset. They'll grow back stronger now, you'll see." They did not. We have a shared community grill in our condo complex. The guy in 3B uses it constantly but never cleans it. He leaves it caked in grease and burnt food. I finally said something to him, and he explained his philosophy. The leftover char from my last meal adds a smoky, seasoned flavour to my next one. I'm doing everyone a favour by pre-seasoning the grill. You're welcome. My neighbour became convinced that my son's small toy drone was a CIA surveillance device. We'd be flying it 10 feet off the ground in our own yard, and he'd run outside in a bathrobe, shaking his fist. The situation escalated when I found him on his roof one morning, setting up a large fishing net attached to a pole, which he called his anti-espionage aerial defence system. The family next door has 4 kids and a massive trampoline. They placed it directly next to the 6-foot privacy fence separating our yards. Now, all day long, the kids bounce so high that their heads pop up over the fence, allowing them to stare directly into our kitchen and living room windows. It's like a constant, annoying game of human whack-a-mole. My neighbour has a guest who parks in a way that blocks half of my driveway. It happens every weekend. I finally knocked on the door and asked if they could have their guest move their car. My neighbour replied, "Oh, they're only going to be here for a minute." I watched them proceed to unload a week's worth of groceries and a new TV, and the car was still there 4 hours later. The woman across the hall claims her cat is a psychic. She'll stop me to deliver messages from Mittens. Usually it's nonsense like, "Mittens says you should try the new raspberry seltzer." But one day she stopped me with a grave look on her face and said, "Mittens is very concerned about the dark aura she sees emanating from your ficus tree. She thinks it's plotting against you." I share a property line with a guy who is obsessed with every single inch of his land. I came home one day and noticed our shared fence seemed slightly closer to my house. I thought I was crazy, but then I measured. The next week, it was closer again. I realised he was digging up the posts and moving the entire fence 1 inch onto my property every weekend, thinking I wouldn't notice. My neighbour details his truck in the driveway every Sunday. His method involves using a pressure washer to blast a thick layer of cheap dish soap all over it, which then runs down the slanted driveway and covers my car in a sticky, bubbly film. When I complained, he said, "Hey, free pre-soak for you. I should be charging you for this service." The guy in the apartment above me decided to start a worm farm for composting on his balcony. Unfortunately, his container leaked. For a solid week, a foul-smelling brown liquid, which he later cheerfully identified as compost tea, dripped steadily down onto my patio, ruining my chairs and creating a puddle of sludge. He offered me a jar of it for my houseplants as an apology. The family next door has a beautiful lemon tree with one large branch that hangs over into our yard. According to property law, the lemons on our side are ours. When my wife went to pick one, the neighbour ran out and screamed, "Those are my lemons! Their roots are in my soil. You're stealing their life essence." She then started shaking the branch violently, so all the lemons on our side fell back into her yard. I live in a duplex with a shared laundry room. The guy I share it with has a bizarre habit. If he needs the machine and my clothes are in it, even if they're mid-wash, he will take my wet, soapy clothes out and just dump them in a pile on the dusty floor so he can use it. His justification was, "The machine's time is a shared resource. Your clothes' cleanliness is your own responsibility." My neighbour, a retired man with far too much time on his hands, appointed himself the official neighbourhood parking enforcement officer. It started with him leaving little, poorly written citations on cars for minor infractions, like a tyre touching the line. One afternoon, my sister came to visit and parked on the public street. He came marching out of his house, wearing a fluorescent yellow safety vest and holding a clipboard, demanding to see her visitor's permit. When she explained she was just visiting me, he began taking photos of her license plate, informing her that he was documenting the violation for the tribunal. The climax came when I found my own car, parked perfectly in my own driveway, with a giant wheel clamp on it. He had bought it online. His reasoning? My car's bumper was casting a shadow that extended 2 inches into the public sidewalk, which he deemed a pedestrian obstruction. The guy who lived in the apartment above me decided to get into home brewing. The problem was, he was terrible at it. The first sign was the constant smell of boiled cabbage and stale bread that filled the hallway. Then, one Saturday morning, I was woken up by what sounded like a small explosion, followed by a frantic scurrying sound. A few minutes later, a thick, sticky brown liquid began dripping from my ceiling light fixture onto my new rug. I ran upstairs and banged on his door. He opened it, covered head to toe in foam, and explained that he had over-carbonated a batch of oatmeal stout and 6 bottles had exploded simultaneously. He then had the nerve to ask if he could borrow a mop, because his was currently occupied absorbing the primary blast zone. My neighbour became obsessed with the idea that our neighbourhood had a serious squirrel problem. He called them tree rats and agents of chaos. He started by setting up harmless traps, but then he escalated. He built what he called a perimeter defence system, which consisted of motion-activated sprinklers aimed not at his lawn but at the base of my oak tree. Any time a squirrel, or my cat or the mailman got too close, they'd get blasted with water. The final straw was when he mounted a series of small, high-powered speakers on his fence posts and began broadcasting the sound of a hawk screeching at full volume from dawn until dusk to create a no-fly zone for rodents. We have a shared backyard in our duplex, and my neighbour decided to plant a garden. Instead of flowers or vegetables, he planted what he called historically significant weeds. He had sections for dandelions, crabgrass and thistle, complete with little museum-style plaques explaining their botanical resilience and cultural impact. He would spend hours out there, lovingly watering and tending to his weeds. When the landlord sent him a notice to clear the overgrown mess, he wrote back a 5-page letter accusing the landlord of attempting to erase botanical history and perpetuating a discriminatory pro-floral agenda. My neighbour was a musician who was trying to master a single incredibly high note on his trumpet. For months, every single day from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m., our entire building was subjected to the sound of him trying and failing to hit this note. It was an endless cycle of a straining build-up, followed by a sound like a goose being strangled. I finally went over to ask if he could please practice with a mute. He looked at me with genuine confusion and said, "But how will I know if I'm truly connecting with the universe, if I can't hear the note echo through the cosmos? The walls of this building are my amplifier." The family next door bought a massive, professional-grade bouncy castle for their kid's birthday party. The party ended, but the castle did not. They left it fully inflated in their backyard for the entire summer, running the loud generator 24/7. It was so large, it blocked all the afternoon sun from my vegetable garden. When I asked when they planned to take it down, the dad explained, "We can't. The kids see it as a permanent fixture of their kingdom now. Deflating it would be like treason. Besides, the constant hum of the generator helps me sleep." My neighbour was convinced that my outdoor Wi-Fi security camera was secretly recording him inside his own house. He claimed he could feel the surveillance waves penetrating his drywall. He started by wearing a tinfoil hat whenever he was in his yard. Then, he escalated by installing a series of large, polished hubcaps on the side of his house facing mine, which he claimed would deflect the invasive signals. The situation peaked when he bought a high-powered laser pointer and would spend his evenings trying to blind the camera's optic nerve, creating a rave-like light show that flashed directly into my bedroom window all night.